We're back. It is Kevin's Corner. It is leading into Week 6, and what really for mid-October, this is about as, frankly, juicy of an AFC South matchup as you're going to get. I think, Eddie, one of these, like, if you win on Sunday, your division odds increase by X. If you lose, they decrease by X. I have a feeling like this would be one of the games that would have a bigger variance. Again, especially for a Week 6 game in the month of October. So we'll get to Colts-Jags here in a bit. 4-point spread, I believe, was the last I saw with Jacksonville favored in this one. And obviously we know how much of a house of horrors that's been for the Colts. But before we get into any of that, certainly two big items. And one is just us getting an opportunity to finally have a little bit of time to chat about it, and that would be the Jonathan Taylor contract extension, and the other would be the latest on Anthony Richardson, which, man, I'm leaving Colts practice right now, and I'll admit, turning over my left and all of a sudden seeing Anthony Richardson in a sling was quite the sight to see as he was watching his first of, certainly at least 4 weeks of practice that he will watch. So that'll be the lay of the land for today's podcast. Richardson, Taylor, Jags talk. We'll also play our interview from Will Carroll. For those unfamiliar with Will, he's an injury expert here in town, has a lot of history in the medical field, and medical and sports field, and I always appreciate that blend because, I think that can be different than just strictly, obviously, the sports field, or just strictly the medical field, and I think Will provides a little bit more insight into what exactly an AC joint sprain is and all the ramifications off of that. Eddie, good afternoon. That looks like a wonderful dessert you're having.
Yeah, it's a nice little snack. Just need something cold. I was feeling a little hot, so nice little popsicle. It's cookie butter.
Look at that.
Yeah, we had Marcus. No, I can't remember who we had studio on Querying Company.
Yeah.
Brought in a box of popsicles for us.
Gosh, I might have to go grab one here. Rosie Bowen would love if I bring that home. My
question to you is, before we start diving too deep into this, what was it like seeing a number 12 jersey on the practice field?
I know, yeah, Kellen Mond rocking number 12, and he's got like the height and the weight that it's like, oh wait, that's not DeMichael Harris.
Yeah,
I'm trying to think of years past when they have given out number 12, or I think Vincent Smith might have been number 12 this year at training camp. So yeah, Kellen Mond. Decorated collegian, Eddie. I believe it's him, Tebow, and Dak Prescott, the only SEC QBs with at least, I think it's 9,000 yards and 1,000 rushing yards for their careers. I don't know, maybe Hendon Hooker cracked that, but at least when Mond was exiting A&M, he was one of three. And obviously, has not lived up to whatever hype there was. I mean, he was a third-round pick. He's thrown, I think, 3 passes in his career. Minnesota and Cleveland, and he is your third quarterback right now. So we'll see how things play out with Gardner Minshew. And then Sam Ehlinger and Kellen Mond. But yeah, let's just start there, Eddie. I know we hit on it a little bit on Monday, but certainly have some clarity on it now, and I guess are still awaiting even further clarity. But injured reserve for Anthony Richardson, out at least 4 weeks. Shane Steichen made sure to say he'll be out for a minimum of 4 weeks. So I think that's where you get into the... First off, I think there's a pretty obvious timetable of, yes, he's on IR, which means 4 weeks, but we all have looked at the schedule, and I mapped it out on Monday. Okay, so 4 weeks means what? No Jacksonville, no Cleveland, no New Orleans, no Carolina. By the way, do they flex Colts, Panthers out of 405 now that Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young will not be the matchup?
My guess is no, because are they Eastern?
Carolina?
Yeah.
Eastern time zone? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Charlotte for sure.
I don't know if it...
I just meant bump that to 1 o'clock and then bump somebody from 1 to 405. That's neither here nor there. Then the week 5 would be New England and Germany, and then the week 6 would be the bye week. So I think it makes plenty of sense to obviously sit Anthony Richardson until at least you get back from the bye week. That would be Tampa Bay the Sunday after Thanksgiving. That would leave 7 games to go this season. Adam Schefter reported, 4 to 8 weeks, and Shane Steichen certainly did not say anything to the contrary today when asked, hey, is surgery a possibility? We'll talk to the doctors and we'll figure that out. Is there a chance this is season ending? We'll see. We'll talk to the doctors and figure that out. So, this is at least going to be 4 weeks, and in all likelihood, it's probably going to be a little bit longer than that. And Eddie, let's be honest, they're going to be pretty cautious, I would think, with it, considering it's the throwing shoulder of your franchise quarterback, and PTSD for Jim Irsay and Chris Ballard have got to be alive and well. The overwhelming word that I cannot get out of my head, Eddie, is just bummed. I think this is just an absolute bummer that this is where we're at with Anthony Richardson's rookie season. And let's just play out the 4-week timetable. You'll be 9 games into Anthony Richardson's rookie year, and he will have started and finished 1. And if you look at the amount of quarters he will have missed of game action, the amount of practices he will have missed, I mean, that as well. I mean, he's going to miss, 9 games, so that's 25 of the 36 quarters he's played in so far. Or 25 of the 36 quarters he will have missed have played in 11. If you look at the amount of practices that he's had, he will have missed, over half of those. So again, all of that is just where I come back to this is a bummer. Reps are so vital for him. In a way, if you are a fan of the Indianapolis Colts, you suffered last year. Hell, you've suffered through the quarterback carousel. But let's just talk specifically last year. You went 4-12-1. It was arguably, in my opinion, the most embarrassing season this franchise has had in Jim Irsay's ownership. You fired one coach, you fired a coordinator, you hired a dude from TV that looked like, that dude was going to be the head coach for the national media, and then, all of a sudden, here comes Shane Steichen, et cetera, et cetera. You suffer all that disappointment and embarrassment. The reward at the end of the tunnel should be, here's your rookie QB, now you get to watch him. And you get to watch him grow and mature and experience what life in the NFL is like. And now that's stunted, and that's been halted. And Eddie, I think I sit here and I'm very encouraged by what Anthony Richardson has shown on the football field. But I'm also man, he started and finished just 1 game. That fourth quarter against the Rams, when I was really, really impressed by what he showed late in that game, I'm that's the norm, right? Or is it the outlier?
Right.
These are the things you just don't know because the sample size is so incredibly small. You want to see him in more fourth quarter moments. Look at the upcoming schedule. I mean, if you talk about Jacksonville, Cleveland, New Orleans, even a little New England, some pretty good defenses. I mean, that would be kind of great opportunities for Richardson. So that's where, again, it's just an absolute kick in the nuts. Just an absolute kick in the nuts to what your expectations were, to what you're going to get to this season. And I don't know how we get to January or February. I don't know. Maybe he'll play the final 7 games and it'll all go swimmingly well and he'll stay healthy. But the odds are that probably won't happen. And so, Eddie, you're going to get to January and February, and the thing that you want the most, you want to get clarity out of your young quarterback as quickly as possible. And obviously that's not always going to be the case. Clearly it's not in this instance. But you want clarity. You want clarity as them as a player, and you want clarity as them handling NFL life. And handling NFL life is the fame, the fortune, and it's also a 17-game schedule. And insert South Alabama here on the schedule, or, insert your directional school that you're going to play. I mean, these are 17 very tough games, and getting through that, progressing into a playoff team, et cetera, is quite the challenge. And for year one, unfortunately, a lot of that clarity gets pretty clouded with this. And really, a lot of it is injury related, arguably 80, 90% of it. And I think that's what makes this extra difficult is the questions we now have about Richardson, they don't have a lot of easy answers. It's not oh yeah, he's he threw 30 picks as a rookie. He's got to clean that up. Or, man, 48%, you got to rise in that number. It's not those aren't really the questions. It's more of just how does he stay healthy? Can he stay healthy? I mean, I felt like an idiot today asking Shane Steichen, he's 21 years old. Is there any – because I know Shane feels this way off the record. I was curious if he'd say it on the record. But I'm is there any sort of are you worried about him, like, in terms of his body still needs to grow, like, or like develop, become, like, he's 21. He gained 10 pounds out of the blue. He pretty much said this offseason, like, hey, I wasn't even trying to get to 255, and I just did. Like, is that part of what's leading to some of these injuries? And obviously Shane didn't say anything on that end, but I felt like that was, at least a question that needs to be asked, and I'm sure it's a question, and I know it's a question the Colts have thought about internally. So that's where they're kind of at a loss, and I think a lot of us are kind of at a loss with all of this.
Does the expectation or the outlook on what they're trying to accomplish change now with the uncertainty of how long he's out? Because as we've talked about religiously this year, primarily about the development of Anthony Richardson and what kind of quarterback is he? Is he an NFL quarterback? And now there's a possibility that, hey, he could be out 4 weeks, he could be out the rest of the year. And if so, does that change what they're trying to accomplish now the rest of the season, possibly if Gardner Minshew is the starting quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to remove that from the storyline book, if you will. And Eddie, I think it's one thing for, like, me to lay out storylines. It's another thing for Shane Steichen to lay out storylines. I mean, yes, he gets the importance of Anthony Richardson, without question. But he also gets the importance of a win every single Sunday as being the sole goal. And that obviously remains the goal. I mean, I do think, and let's just stick to Richardson here for just a second. The question becomes, okay, playing style-wise, what should change? Is there anything that can change? I've long said you don't draft him 4 overall if you're going to say to him, hey, man, what you do really well, we're not going to do that anymore, and that would be him running. Like, that still needs to be there. Go back and watch the Zach Moss touchdown from Sunday. If that's Gardner Minshew, there's no way that goes for 56. Tennessee doesn't have a corner and a safety kind of stuck in mud for a second, preoccupied by what Richardson's going to do. Boom, they're out of position, and Moss is running the other way. Now, I think the number, and we had Stephen Holder on our morning show earlier today. Stephen said that 16 design runs have been called for Anthony Richardson this season. We know of the 4 injuries that he has suffered. 3 of those 4 have occurred on the design runs. So if you look at the 16 design runs called, 3 of those 16 have led to an injury. So my question becomes this, Eddie. If you look at Richardson so far, he's played about 170 snaps. So you've had 16 design runs and about 170 snaps. So that's 1 every 10, 1 every 11. Sorry for all the math here. Can you bring that number down a little bit? Can that number become 1 out of every 17, 1 out of every 18? Because I still think the threat of him as a runner will always be there as long as you do it on occasion. Like what Tennessee play defensively on the Zach Moss touchdown run, that's always going to be there.
Yeah.
But maybe instead of 8 design runs a game or whatever the number is, what if it's 4? And what that would do is it would lessen the opportunities for him to be prone to injury. Let's not say injury prone, but prone to injury. And it would obviously keep him away from a couple of extra hits a game. Now, injuries can be very freakish and very flukish, and you never know when they're going to arise. Deshaun Watson tears his ACL in practice, the other year. So I know you aren't going to totally eliminate it, but I'm thinking, okay, how can you lessen it a little bit, still make sure that threat is there? Because you got to find some happy medium, I think, with this. So that's a thought that I have had just with his style of play, because obviously that is such a big question. I know we talked about this a little bit on Monday, Eddie, but you go back and watch those 4 plays, and if you look at the hits that were against him in those 4 plays, 3 of the 4 defenders who hit him, they weighed 40 pounds or more, less than him. 40 pounds, more than 40 pounds less than him. Hope that makes sense. Richardson weighs 255. You got a 215-pound linebacker in Jacksonville hitting him on one. You got a 200-pound Houston safety on another. You've got a 209-pound Jacksonville safety on the other. So, obviously, Harold Landry is very close to his size. Probably height-wise isn't quite as tall as Richardson, but still 250 pounds. But what I'm getting at there is, again, I mean, these are hits coming from dudes that weigh 40 pounds less than him that are still leading to injuries and still knocking him out of a game, a practice, showing up on the injury report, however you want to describe the variance of the injuries. And Shane Steichen said it on Monday. It's not like any of these hits have been dirty. You know, I mean, it's not like we've had the malicious, that dude's getting fined big time for the hit, or that dude's going to be suspended big time for that hit. So I think that's something that also stands out to me. I would just say a couple other things Richardson related, Eddie, before we move into Taylor, and obviously feel free to chime in. I think hindsight is extremely 20/20 in this. But I did want to ask Shane Steichen on Monday, during the draft process, how much did you discuss his durability and kind of withstanding the nature that comes with playing in the NFL, particularly when your playing style is that of a quarterback? Mm-hmm. Because, Eddie, again, hindsight is very 20/20. I can't recall many times if we ever really went down this path during the draft process. But I think one of the unknowns when you draft a dude who has 13 starts is there is that element of how much can you handle the wear and tear of one season into the next, into the next, into the next. You know, when you look at a guy like Lamar Jackson at Louisville, he started for 3 years and was really healthy for those 3 seasons. So did that give ball? And even then, he still fell to 32 and was the 5th quarterback taken in that draft. So clearly there were still questions. And his frame is different than Richardson's frame. I do think Lamar does a great job of never taking, like, square hits. He just, you know, Rick Venturi, the color analyst for the Colts, always calls him an eel. I think that's such a great way to describe it. He's just so slippery, and you just don't get square shots on him. It does seem like Richardson's had a couple square shots against him this season where guys have just gotten a lot of his body, if you will. And I think when you evaluate a guy during the draft process, I feel like you have got to have that discussion of like, hey, he's only played 13 games. Any worry about how the hits start to add up? Any worry about, you know, what this looks like as we play a 17-game schedule out, NFL hits or not SEC hits? And again, it probably bleeds more into the career window question. And you guys have heard me say this 1,000 times. You know, my thought process, my goal when drafting that young quarterback is you are creating something that you had with Manning. You're creating a window that is in an 8 to 10 year range. I'm being a little realistic, obviously, with the 8 to 10 years. Or if you want to use modern-wise, what Kansas City has right now with Mahomes, what Buffalo is nearing, what Cincinnati is nearing, obviously what Houston is trying to do with the draft pick of C.J. Stroud, et cetera, because that helps you make these annual type of runs or at least feel like that you have a shot. And I think if that debate happened and you looked at Richardson for 13 games in college, I think you would have to have a little bit of unknown of like, I don't know. I mean, he's 6'4", 250, so I hope he holds up, but you just don't truly know. And to be fair, he really wasn't hurt in the 13 games at Florida. His injuries were honestly a little bit more in spot duty before that, and then he had the shoulder injury in high school. But Shane basically said that they didn't discuss that during the draft process, which I was a little surprised by that answer. I'm thinking, I mean, hell, you're probably talking to like the janitor of the junior high that these guys went to. You know, when you talk about a running quarterback, I feel like that has to be discussed. So I think that covers everything Richardson related, Eddie. I know a lot of it is doom and gloom, and I think that's just the unfortunate nature for my rookie expectations for him, and that I just thought it was so important that he plays a lot and gets into these moments that you just can't script. And the fact that it is injury-related, that adds to kind of the bummer of it all. And, you know, I'll be curious to see if it's surgery, if it's not. You know, I've said this before about Andrew Luck, and I know it's a shoulder, but it's not the same as that shoulder injury. I think if Luck would have had surgery right away after the 2015 season and not waited a full another year to have it, we could be talking about a different story with Andrew Luck. So I'm interested to see if Anthony Richardson goes down that path. A lot more of the medical aspect to it. Will Carroll, we'll play that interview coming up here in a bit. We'll get into. But anything else, Eddie, on Anthony Richardson on injured reserve?
He was in a sling today at practice. So
yeah, in a sling. Was observing practice. Yeah, you just hated to see him even in that. I mean, it's...
Yeah.
And then, do you worry at all about, like, okay, it's a right shoulder. Are you missing, like, valuable muscle memory reps, with him? That who he has retooled his it's not a lot. It's probably retooled more of his lower body. Again, I don't think that's something that's, like, I'm super worried about, but it's a question that I have of, like, would you feel better if this was a left ankle injury versus a right shoulder injury? So,
well, if it's more footwork,
yeah, sure, you could totally go the other way. Yeah,
something you can still work on.
Obviously, you would hope like left shoulder versus right shoulder.
Right.
If you're really narrowing it down to those body parts there. So, I think there's so much to be encouraged by in watching Anthony Richardson play football. And I think for everybody, the hope is that he plays football again this season and is able to end the year on some positive notes. Because I asked Shane Steichen the final question of the press conference today. I'm like, how's he doing emotionally? I mean, I feel like if I were a 21-year-old rookie and all of this, and you've had the taste of success in the NFL, and then you get thrown this, and we'll see when he comes back, that would impact me a bit. And, obviously you need your quarterback pretty mentally wired to have the amount of success that you want to in the NFL. So by no means, obviously, is this career threatening or, oh my gosh, this is, there's no chance he ever recovers from this. Not at all. But it is a huge, huge bummer, in my opinion.
Transitioning now to the Jonathan Taylor contract extension from Saturday. 3 years, $42 million in total, $26.5 million guaranteed. And I think the biggest part about this that we will talk about is the outs in that final year. It leaves a dead cap of $2.5 million, just in case you want to get out of the Jonathan Taylor contract, which lines up with the fifth-year option pickup on Anthony Richardson's contract. So pick where you want to start with the extension itself.
Well, can I just be happy the story's gone away?
Yes.
I mean, the story's gone away and he helps you, right? So both of those things win. It's not just like
win.
Yeah, checks all those boxes there. Eddie, 3 years and $39 million. That was kind of the ballpark that I always had with this. The 3-year aspect to it from an extension standpoint bleeds into that 2026 year, like you said. But that 2026 year, none of that's guaranteed. So, I mean, if you want to the point you just brought up, you can get that out right when you've got to make the first decision on Richardson. The first decision on Richardson comes after 2025. That is, if you pick up the fifth-year option on him or not. The likelihood would be that you would. Pretty much if the quarterback has shown you anything, you're going to pick up that fifth-year option. But at that point, I think that's when you've reached a critical juncture of Richardson's career, not only for him individually, but for your own building process. So individually, it's like, all right, we've seen him now for 2.5 years or however much playing time he gets the rest of the season. We know what he's like. We know what he wants. We know what we need. How do we go about that? Do we feel like Taylor's still got some juice? Do we feel like it's another 2 years? Probably not. So that's where you have such an ability to maneuver. You maintain some flexibility. You obviously open up some nice cap space. And it helps you start to retool things as you get into the era of, oh, wow, we're now paying a quarterback. And this franchise has not really been in that position for a handful of years. So I think that was an important feature to the contract that I wanted to see. So good work by the Colts, in my opinion, on making sure that length kind of matched up to that level. Certainly, Eddie, there are questions that I'm curious about, and Taylor is in no mood to share the answers on those questions of the hypotheticals of, would he have played without a contract? Would the Colts have paid him without seeing him practice twice? These are all questions that I'm just kind of curious about. A lot of it is a bit water under the bridge in terms of like the deal has happened, but just to get a better picture of what the story is, why did Jim Irsay say on Saturday, this happened sooner than I would have liked? Like, clearly Irsay was not totally on board with this happening when it did necessarily. He obviously gave the sign-off on it. But why does he say that? Does he just not like paying a running back this early? Does he not like paying one that was a little banged up last year? Does he not like Malky Kawa dancing on graves right now and sending out 3.5-minute long videos of exposing everybody that tweeted about him over the past, 2 or 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably a little bit of everything.
I'm just glad we didn't end up on there.
On that, I was looking for myself. I was a little shocked that we didn't show up on that. But again, I think we can debate who won, whatever. I guess technically Taylor won because he got the money and he got paid when he was on the PUP list. But let's be honest here, everybody wins. Richardson wins, the Colts win, Chris Ballard wins,
the fans win,
etc. You had money to spend. This does not mean you can't do other things from a spending standpoint. You don't have established weapons at receiver and tight end, and you've got to support your young quarterback. So, to me, this checks so many of those boxes. And, I know our listeners have heard this before. I am a believer that you don't draft a running back in round 1, 2, or 3 because I view those positions as guys that can play high-level premium football for you in that 8-year window, and you're not going to have second thoughts about that. In running backs, I don't think they have the shelf life to get there anymore. I do think Taylor can be a bit of an anomaly, but more than anything, when you have a young quarterback like this, and in my opinion, he needs as much support as possible, you need to do things a little bit differently. And the fact that Jonathan Taylor is only 24 years old, the fact that this contract falls more in kind of like that 6-year time frame, then that's why I think that it should be done. Again, in an ideal world, that second-round pick for Taylor, he'd be impacting at a cornerback position. So you're not maybe necessarily in this big a scramble mode. And that is a guy that you feel very good about playing deep into a second contract, or a pass rusher, or insert other premium position here. Anything on your end, Eddie? It sounds like the workload's going to increase a little bit. 10 snaps, 7 touches in total for Taylor in week 1.
How much?
10 snaps and 7 total touches, 6 carries, 1 catch.
How much would you expect an increase, though?
I'd probably double it.
Because you heard, I don't know how much or how many times you counted this, but he said he was excited for next week 4 different times after the game on Sunday.
Right. I think there's an element of you still are going to ease him a little bit.
And then he was listed as the RB1 on the depth chart, right? Yeah, they updated that?
I don't read too much into that, but I do think it's something that you can't get away from Zach Moss too much right now. I mean, he's feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
And Zach Moss has never been in a rhythm in the NFL because he's never produced like this. So I do think running back is a little bit of you ride that hot hand, and it looks like your O-line might get Bernard Ryman back, so you're back to your normal starting 5. We'll see how the Braden Smith injury situation plays out this week. But, if I'm divvying up carries right now, Eddie, so what was it? Taylor got 6 and Moss got 23. Would that have been the final count from Sunday? Let's just call it 30. I'd probably go 20-10, 20 Moss, 10 Taylor for this week. Maybe 19-11, 18-12, something like that. And then I think slowly but surely you will get to that 50-50 split, and Taylor will eventually take over. But I still think Zach Moss is running really well. And we can get more into this when we talk about Jacksonville, Eddie. But, it's crazy how much has changed since these teams met a month ago. I mean, tomorrow's literally the 1-month anniversary from the game, and there's so many changes. More so for the Colts than Jacksonville, but even Jacksonville has some. So, again, the Taylor contract made sense. The timing of it is very odd. The Thursday press conference, which I guess we really didn't talk about on the podcast, very odd. Jonathan Taylor, I'm like, whoa. I mean, this is I don't even know who he is. It's just wild to listen to him in these press conference settings.
How was he today? Was he closer to the guy that you guys knew, or somewhere between of this current?
Yeah, probably somewhere between, both of that. But yeah, he's just an interesting cat. And there is part of me, Eddie, that sits there and is like, did you just waste 4 games and 2 months of unnecessary drama for nothing? I don't know, maybe Taylor's camp won in 3 years and $18 million a year. And maybe they eventually got down to this level. But 3 years, $42 million seems very reasonable. And it would have seemed very reasonable to me in July. And it just, if this is what it took, and I don't know, maybe you need to see Taylor practice 2 days. Maybe you need to see a 2-2 Colts team look better than that you thought. Richardson looking better than you thought. Maybe Taylor was only going to play if he got paid. But to me, it just seems like quite the public stink of it all for you to get to a deal that, I mean, in late July, I was like, oh yeah, that's a no-brainer to me.
This is the first in-season extension that Chris Ballard has made, right, in his regime or era?
The only other one I can think of is Grover Stewart back in 20, whatever that would have been, 19 or 20, November of that year. I think that's it. Jack Doyle, I don't think so. Yeah, I mean, several of them right before the season started, like right before. Luke Rhodes even this year, just 48 hours before. But yeah, this is, and honestly, it's got a Shaquille Leonard feel to it from training camp. You remember Leonard signed the deal a couple years ago, and then 2 days later he was back.
Yeah.
Taylor signs it, and whatever, 24 hours, he's back playing in a game. So I say this like half jokingly, half seriousness. I'm really glad it's over. Again, I'm a little selfish with that comment, but I also think it's good just to move on from this. Like, if you would have let this played out and then slapped the franchise tag on him, Eddie, that's all next offseason's about. And then for the first year and a half of Anthony Richardson's career, all he has seen is like a drama-filled contract dispute playing out between the Colts and their best player. And that screams unhealthy to me. Mm-hmm. So I know that this is, and I got this question right after you and I were done recording on Monday. I went on our sister station, WIBC, and I go on there every Monday after games. And one of the questions that their host asked me was, does this send the wrong message to the locker room of if you whine, you will get paid eventually? Totally fair question. I think it's a really relevant one. My response was, no, I don't think it sends that message because, Eddie, if you're Chris Ballard and I am whatever, EJ Speed is popping in my head, and I start whining.
Zaire Franklin.
And I feel bad using Franklin because he's had a great start of the year, but okay, fine. Franklin still doesn't have the same resume that Taylor did. Michael Pittman. Let's use that one, all right?
Okay.
You are Chris Ballard, I'm Michael Pittman, and I say, where's my contract? And you say to me, when have you been a Pro Bowler? When have you sniffed being a Pro Bowler? When did you set the franchise record for most rushing yards, a franchise that includes 4 Hall of Famers at running back?
Tied the league record for touchdowns, didn't he? Or was he close? Or was it franchise?
Yeah, close.
Tied for franchise. And
the other big
touchdowns.
one to me is, when did you achieve the highest yards per carry in NFL history through 3 seasons? That's what Taylor has on his resume. Taylor has a resume where, as bad as it sounds, he could whine and he had a lot of leverage. I know that like people viewed running back and they're like, no. But I mean, when you're paid the 5th highest offensive player and it's a team that is void of a lot of offensive weapons, that is where he had some leverage in this. And, I've brought up before, Mo Alley Cox is making more money than Jonathan Taylor. So this one checks the box. Again, I think an overall building philosophy of don't draft running backs in the first 3 rounds, that to me is still a core belief that I would have. But considering where you're at as a franchise right now with your quarterback situation, supporting that quarterback, using money that I'm not very optimistic would have been used in a significant manner elsewhere, that to me also makes sense. And it matches up a timeline that still allows you to do other things and doesn't hamstring you deep into the 2020s.
Anything else to add, or would you like to start previewing the opponent for Sunday?
Let's go into Jacksonville.
Look at the Jacksonville Jaguars. They spent their last 2 weeks across the pond in London.
That's got to be a good thing for the Colts, right?
I was about to say the same thing to you. I said it feels like this could have a game where either A, Jacksonville is just flat the entirety, or they come out flat, Colts get ahead, and then they try to make a comeback in the second half.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how Jacksonville shows up. And I think this echoes kind of what I said at the start of the podcast, Eddie. I think this is a huge game for both teams. I mean, when you view it, I was looking up a stat the other day. Both The Colts, I think, have the third easiest schedule the rest of the way right now. Jacksonville has the sixth hardest schedule the rest of the way. So, if you look at, let's say the Colts go out and win on Sunday, you'll have split the head-to-head. You'll have given Jacksonville their second division loss.
Yeah.
Whereas the Colts only have one division loss. So that's the second tiebreaker. If you split head-to-head, it goes to what is your AFC South record. So as long as the Colts hold serve the rest of the way at Tennessee, home to Houston, you'll have, gotten that head-to-head tiebreaker over Jacksonville. So that is a big, big deal when you're talking about these two teams potentially being there at the end. Now, again, I said this in week 1, and I think I only feel stronger about it here in week 6, Eddie. I think it's the best collection of offensive skill you see all year long. Mm-hmm. I think Lawrence, ETN, we'll see about Zay Jones' health, but Christian Kirk and Calvin Ridley looked really, really good. Evan Ingram, I think it's the best skill group plus quarterback you'll see all year. Maybe Cincinnati, but still, who knows what Cincinnati's going to look like come week 14, whenever that is. Now, where you have a huge advantage is, again, that Jacksonville O-line. Mm-hmm. That is a group that I think you can beat up. And so that is an absolute must, and it does look like Kwity Paye back to work today, so that's a good sign for Sunday. But I'll go back to what I was saying earlier about how much this has changed since week 1. Think about it, Eddie.
Walker Little, by the way, for Jacksonville, undergoing an MRI on his knee after he left Sunday's game over the Bills. Cam Robinson, he exited briefly in that game against Buffalo with an elbow injury, but Doug Peterson has said that he will be fine. So he should be able to suit up against the Colts.
Yeah, and we should be getting the injury report here pretty shortly, so we'll provide that if we do. Keep an eye on that, Eddie, if you don't mind. Week 1, Anthony Richardson, the quarterback. Well, now it's Gardner Minshew. Week 1, your running backs were Deion Jackson, Evan Hall, and Jake Funk. Well, now it's Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor. Week 1, your cornerbacks were Dallas Flowers and Darrell Baker Jr. flanking Kenny Moore. Now it's Juju Brents and Jalen Jones. And you just brought up Cam Robinson. He was out for week 1 with the start of a 4-game suspension. So, these teams, it's just been a month, but man, you want to talk about some big differences, more Colts related than Jacksonville related. Absolutely huge in terms of how different the personnel is. That was a wacky game, I thought, in week 1. Tale of two halves for Richardson, really good in the first half, a little deer in headlights in the second half. You had the crazy fumble play, where Buckner picks it up after Franklin punches it out, and I guess DeForest got the original strip. I thought your secondary played decent. I thought Jacksonville made some such impressive catches at the moment of truth. 50-50 balls where they just snagged them, man. They just made big-time plays. And that's part of them, and that's part of having elite skill at the pass-catching spots. But, again, I think this is a Jacksonville team that's got some very impressive offensive talent. We do have
an injury report?
We do have the Colts injury report. Not a long one, by the way.
Good.
On a Wednesday. Was last week the long one?
Yeah.
I feel like last week was the long one. Okay, your DNPs, your only 2. Mo Alley Cox concussion, Braden Smith foot and wrist. Never like to see multiple injury reports listed or multiple body parts listed.
Foot is a new one for him.
Foot is a new one. Wrist. Wasn't it thumb? Was it thumb or was it wrist? Yeah, you're right. It was the right wrist that he played through last week. Then the other 3 that all missed last week were all full. That would be Shaq. That would be Kwity Paye. That would be Bernard Ryman. So all in all, I think pretty good on that front. We'll continue to watch Braden Smith, and obviously if he can't go, Blake Freeland, get used to flip-flopping tackle spots like he has already had to do here in his first season. Hey, I'm trying to think other things first meeting-wise. Obviously the game really turned on the Jamal Agnew punt. Mm-hmm. That was just such a critical play in the fourth quarter, Eddie, that in a snap of a finger, and Rigo didn't punt it well, remember, in that game. So, yeah, just wild. And you have the elephant in the room that you haven't won there since 2014. I think it has little bearing on Sunday. By little, I mean like 2% of bearing on Sunday. But it is still an astonishing stat. Mm-hmm. Astonishing. You were shut out there last year. Minshew has beat you twice in games down there. 2020 and 2019.
Now he's your starting quarterback.
Phillip Rivers beat him in the opener. Do you remember the Cody Kessler game, Eddie?
Gosh.
6-0.
Do I ever.
In 2018, Frank Reich is still going forward on fourth downs in that game. Cody Kessler beating Andrew Luck. You lost in London. I was at that game. That was a crazy Antonio Cromartie game. And then you gave up 51 one time.
51.
51. Matt Hasselbeck, I think, got the start in that one there. I actually went back and looked at the Colts starters from the last time that they won there.
2014?
Yeah. You want a quick rundown of those? Just to hear some names?
Well, can I know the quarterback.
Well, I mean, duh.
Curtis
Andrew
Painter,
Luck,
right?
Trent Richardson, T.Y. Hilton, Reggie Wayne, Dwayne Allen, Kobe Fleener, Anthony Costanzo, Jack Mewhort, A.Q. Shipley, Hugh Thornton, Gosder Chairless, and then your defense. Corey the Legend Redding, Josh Chapman, who I think is on Alabama's staff as a strength coach, Ricky Jean-Francois, Bjorn Werner, Eric Walden, DeQuell Jackson, Josh McNary, and then the vaunted secondary of Greg Toller, Vontae Davis, Mike Adams, and Laron Landry. That is your.
I just twitched.
That is your 2014. What does the banner say? AFC finalist. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That is your 2014 AFC finalist.
I'm twitching after you say Greg Toller.
Colts dominated the Jags, 44-17. I think that was.
Did you even mention Ahmad Bradshaw played in that game for us?
Bradshaw
as well?
in relief duty of Mr. Richardson. He might have been the leading rusher that game, right?
Bradshaw was 9 for 65. You didn't even mention Eugene Marquise Hilton.
T.Y. Hilton in that game as well.
Yeah,
so, again, it's just.
Akeem Nicks, Dante Moncrief. The list
crazy.
just goes on.
And you know what, Eddie, with a win on Sunday, you win 3 in a row in the South. 3 in a row in the AFC South. You obviously didn't do that last year. You didn't do it in 2021. Last time you did it was 2020 when you made the playoffs. So you got to string games together in this division and in any division, obviously. So we'll give our Colts-Jags picks to round it out.
Super Bowl champion for the Jags appeared in that one for them.
A Super Bowl champion?
Yeah.
Blaine Gabbert?
No.
Then Blaine Gabbert went on with Brady.
Yeah.
Who?
Chad Henne.
Chad Henne. Legend.
Can you name Jacksonville's leading rusher in that game?
Jacksonville's leading rusher in the 2014 game was... I have no freaking idea. Do you know his college?
Yeah. If I told you it was college, you give it away. He was on the cover.
Really?
Of the
Fournette?
college video game. No.
Not Fournette. Who?
Denard Robinson.
Wow. Gosh. Big House, Notre Dame, Michigan. That was when Eminem was in the booth with Musburger and Kirk at one point. Anything else Colts Jags, Eddie, before we get to Will Carroll?
I do not have anything else to make Colts fans depressed.
Again, this is the injury expert, Will Carroll. By the way, Eddie, we recorded this on Tuesday morning. He appeared on our show. So at that point, we had not heard 4 to 8 weeks injured reserve for Anthony Richardson. So wanted to make sure we got that in there. Again, hope you find this somewhat educational. Will Carroll.
All right, let's talk injuries. Anthony Richardson obviously has been such a huge story here in Indianapolis. Will Carroll joins us yet again at Injury Expert. If you want to follow him on Twitter, undertheknife.substack.com. Will, good morning, sir. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. You know, when that pool first opened, it was the FanDuel pool, and we had a ton of stuff in there.
I'm sure you have. You been in the pool?
I personally, no. I was working when I was down there, but
gotcha.
It was an interesting little outfit.
Do you know somebody who has been in the pool? I guess you have a buddy.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we might have to talk off air exactly.
Didn't think we'd be transitioning from the Jacksonville pool to the franchise quarterback's shoulder
to an AC joint injury.
But that's where we're at. The always informative Will Carroll's with us here on the Payless Liquors Hotline. Will, thank you for the time as always. Let's just start as basic as you can, even though the answer is probably a bit complicated. What is an AC joint and what does a sprain of it mean?
Well, this part of it is actually fairly simple, and as long as you're not driving to work, you can do this at home. If you just follow your collarbone all the way down to the end, you'll feel a little point, and then you'll feel a little gap there before it becomes what's called the acromion process of your shoulder. So the actual joint, why we call it AC, is it's a acromioclavicular joint. In that little gap is the AC ligament. And anytime there's damage to a ligament, that's a sprain. So a grade 3 usually means it's either significantly torn and is not going to hold under stress, or that it is completely ruptured. So that's what we're looking at. Now, the other problem is there's another structure just under it called the coracoid, and you get the CC joint between the clavicle and the coracoid. And this is where it gets really complicated, because once that gap opens up in the AC, the clavicle, the collarbone, starts to move. And if the coracoid process moves as well, you can actually get a situation where the clavicle collapses, and your collarbone basically is what everything else in your body is hung on. So that can actually be life-threatening. We don't think that's the case here. We just think it's a significant sprain, could need surgery, and the surgery has gotten significantly different, significantly better in the last few years.
You had mentioned yesterday on Twitter that, and I hope I'm saying this last name right, is it Meister?
Yeah, Keith Meister.
Okay. Richardson heading to see Dr. Keith Meister down in the Dallas area. Team physician, ironically, for the Rangers, so kind of a busy guy right now. He was at the University of Florida for a decade. I bring that up because Richardson's team he wasn't there at Florida when Richardson was there, but, the agent and people that, would probably be influencing him on this decision certainly would I assume, have some familiarity or at least a degree of separation or two. What would surgery mean for Anthony Richardson in the rest of the 2023 season?
Well, that's the thing, is this is so completely changed with the advent of what's called suture tape. All you have to do is think back to Brock Purdy, the 49ers quarterback, who had surgery where they put an internal brace in his elbow, and he came back in just months, and he's looked pretty darn good. Keith Meister did that surgery as well. They can do that where they actually basically tie the joint back together, let the ligament heal under repair, and the suture tape is what they call it, that forms the brace. That basically makes it so the ligament can't be hurt. It's stronger than the ligament's ever going to be. We've seen this same kind of thing used in knees. Tua Tagovailoa has it in both high ankles. So we're seeing this used more and more, and it's really successful. The problem is we don't have a case on a high-level quarterback like this. So I really can't say. Normally, with a grade 2, we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks. With a grade 3, this used to be a season ender, but I can't give you a really good one because we just don't have very many examples at this level.
Will Carroll with us at Injury Expert joins us here Tuesday on the Fan on the Payless Liquors hotline. I was going to ask you what's the best and worst case scenario, but it sounds like it's just totally up in the air. That's a fair thing for me to say, right? It's just we don't know yet, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like he's going to suddenly run back in and play next week. That's just not going to happen. I think we're looking at a minimum of a month. I'll be surprised if he doesn't go on the injured reserve because you can bring him back in 4 weeks. And if it's a 4 to 6 week injury, what the heck? That just means you can bring in another quarterback just to be safe. They're going to have to do that, I think. So the upside is, 5 years ago, I would have said this is a season ender. You can come back from this. There's no question about it. It's not like his long-term future is in question, but it's a pretty broad time frame.
This is a silly question, and again, this Dr. Meister seems to be maybe he's a Dr. James Andrews when it comes to these.
He's actually one of his fellows.
There you go. Like when it comes to these sorts of things, but we're looking at like a third option here for AR, going down the road of the initial diagnosis, a second option, and then a third option. To me, that signifies this is worse than maybe we even initially thought. Is that fair? And then when you're getting 2, 3, 4 different opinions, what does that mean in the medical world when so many people are looking at a particular injury?
It's very common. especially for a serious, high-value guy. Like I said, Dr. Meister does all sorts of surgeries. He's a team doctor for the Rangers, as you said. He consults with a lot of other. There's really only about 5 or 6 doctors who are consulted on everything. So it's going to be the same guys over and over. It's one of those deals where there's certain doctors that people go to for certain things. You're going to hear Dr. Andrews, you're going to hear Dr. Meister, you're going to hear Dr. Elatrache. It's a very small community, and 9 out of 10 times it's going to be all of those.
Will Carroll's with us again, the injury expert on Twitter. Undertheknife.com is where you can find his work. Will, is there such a thing as, athletes being injury prone or guys more prone to injury, if you will?
I hate to use the term, especially with somebody as young as Richardson. He had no problems in college. Didn't play that much, but he had no problems. And in this one, he had a concussion, which can happen to anybody. We saw exactly how it happened to him. And he has the same injury that 2 other quarterbacks have. David Carr has it. He has a grade 1. Deshaun Watson had a grade 2. We don't know how long he's going to be out. And we've seen this over and over. Tony Romo had this. Aaron Rodgers had a similar one. He had an AC sprain, but he also broke his collarbone, which is common. You see a lot of these. The shoulders just have no protection. Everybody thinks, oh, but look at those big old shoulder pads. When you're getting driven down and a guy lands on top of you, just think about how your shoulder moves when you're on your side sleeping. Now imagine a 300-pound man jumping on you, and there's not nearly as much give as on a mattress on that turf. So is he injury prone? I don't know. I wouldn't call him that. The guy who tore his other ACL after coming back from rehabbing his other one, those are the kind of guys who I might call injury prone.
Richardson just turned 21 years old. I remember asking him a question at training camp. Will, I'm like, hey, sounds like you've put on some weight. Was that like by choice? And he's like, no, that's just my body growing. And he's listed at 6'4" and 255. Is this something to where his body is still growing per se, and that is contributing to the variety of injuries, or is that dumb?
That was kind of dumb because, again, they're not associated anyway. It's not like his ligaments are falling apart. This is a very clear traumatic injury where other guys have this. If you think back to the draft, we were all told that Bryce Young was going to be the injury-prone one because he was so small.
Right.
And he's fine. This is just one of those things. It happens to quarterbacks because they're down and people land on them, and shoulders are just constructed that way.
Is there anything, Will Carroll with us here on the Payless Liquors hotline? A local columnist here wrote about it yesterday and today, and we've talked a little bit about it. It's been a huge story in the NFL. The playing surface when quarterbacks go down, you're on turf there, Lucas Oil. Does that have anything? Does that contribute anything to injuries such as this?
To this specifically, no. Again, 300-pound men falling on you is not good for any part of your body, but especially the shoulder when you're in that position trying to hold on to the ball. For feet and ankles, there was a significant problem. And a study was done back in 2016, and the turf has been changed twice since then. So is it better? I don't know. A lot of people complain that it's a flat surface. Most have a crown. You can see that kind of arc in the middle. So I don't even know if grass could be put in here without, massive changes, which would probably add to our tax burden. But it's one of those situations where it's really difficult to say because we've seen this exact same injury on grass. Deshaun Watson's happened on grass. I can't remember whether Carr's was at home, which is grass, but it's inside, so it doesn't have the normal give. I just don't see any way you could change it, and I don't think this one you can specifically blame it. When you're talking about like foot and ankle injuries like Derrick Henry had last year playing in Indianapolis, that one I'd look at.
Okay, Will, in summary here, and really appreciate your time on this Tuesday morning. You mentioned, again, Keith Meister, the head physician of the Rangers, someone that Richardson is heading to for another opinion. We would be looking at about 4 to 6 weeks if rehab was chosen, and if surgery was chosen, it'd be much longer than that. Is that correct?
4 to 6 weeks is the low end on this. With a grade 3 It's difficult to say. And if it's surgery again, there's not enough examples at this level with the new kind of surgery that they're using to put these back together to really give a good time frame.
And we would not be looking at anything, though, long term. I guess I'm trying to picture throwing mechanism wise. What would it look like for him getting back to normal?
He'd be fine.
All right, Eddie. That is the injury expert, Will Carroll.
Good stuff.
Yeah, I thought that was informative. Josh Downs, by the way, appeared on our morning show, The Wake Up Call with KB and Andy, on Wednesday. So if you're looking for that, feel free to search our podcast page there. But unless you've got anything else, man, let's do Twitter questions.
How was Josh Downs, by the way?
He was good. Yeah, I think I enjoy Michael Pittman. Alec Pierce isn't going to give you much in those settings, but I enjoy Downs. And I think you watch him on the field and you're like, that dude's a seasoned vet. You listen to him in an interview setting, you're like, that dude's a seasoned vet. You can tell his dad played in the NFL. You can tell Dre Bly's his uncle. Like, he's been around it. Mm-hmm. He just gets it. Jim Bob Cooter had a comment earlier in the week of, us as a coaching staff has so much trust in Josh Downs on option routes. And you think about a rookie, I mean, that's a big deal. If I go this way and he throws it that way, we're
screwed.
That ain't good, man.
We're jaked.
Yeah, we are not good. And they clearly feel comfortable. And again, you guys have heard me say this. Basketball players in the wideout room, enough power forwards. You needed to get a point guard in there. And he's that. And I think he's more than that. I mean, he high-pointed the ball down the field on the 3rd and 16 for the big gain. And I like the variety of routes that he caught balls on Sunday. So, I added him to one of my fantasy teams. I got about 30 injuries on a few weeks back. I'm like,
don't even get me started.
You can feel him emerging.
In our league?
I think he is.
Lost Devon A-Chain and Justin Jefferson, so...
Gosh, man.
I've got the 3rd highest scoring and the most points scored against me. It's ridiculous.
I feel like I had a big week against you.
Yeah, you put up 150.
Yeah.
Anywho, you ready for Twitter questions?
Let's do them.
Tim is up first. Bigger and faster does not pay off when the collision is with an immovable object such as the ground. Anthony Richardson should be able to take big hits and move on. He won't be able to run himself to the ground and walk away. His speed and weight are a disservice. I realize one hit took him out of the game, that being the concussion, but the ground contact is what led to that. Knee equals ground, shoulder equals ground. If he is going to continue to run, lessening the weight and improving flexibility, it could be advantageous. Just my 2 cents, and again, thank you for the articles and the pod.
Tim has got some history in the medical field, Eddie. So
I can tell.
Yeah, and this is why that I wanted to throw it in there, and it kind of sparked a little bit of all right, let's ask Shane Steichen I don't even know what I was asking him. Medical, inertia, gravity. I have no idea what I was asking him, but I don't know. Is he too big and too fast?
Oh boy.
I mean, it sounds so stupid to even say. And obviously there are players of his size that are that big and are that fast. Well, I shouldn't say that fast, but are clearly that big. But big tree fall hard. I mean, I think that's a fair statement to make. I mean, when you hit him and the mile per hour that he can ramp it up to and the size that he's at, it's going to be an impactful hit. So I don't know if we're to the Tua point of you got to get to learn how to fall, that aspect to it, because I think that is so much more difficult than it sounds. But I'll probably stand by more of a controlled thing, and I think if you're Shane Steichen, you've got to look into, okay, how many design runs are we utilizing him in during a game? Because if you can shrink that number a little bit, I think that can be huge for you.
I remember us talking about that too before the season's how many times a game you expect to run him?
Right. And again, Shane has got no reservations. I mean, he wants to run him. So it's going to take something drastic. And I do think internally, I think Shane Steichen's it's like he's seen a ghost a little bit of we got to get this dude healthy. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it has hit him. And I think the issue is they're searching for the answers just as much as everybody else is.
Right. Garrett is up next. We'd love to see if you stand glass half full or glass half empty right now with the Colts defense. Do good defenses allow their opponents to constantly drive into plus territory and not score touchdowns, or do they keep their opponent from gaining yards, period? Feels as if Indy won because they got the plays deep in the field that they needed to in order to win, but not sure how sustainable that is. Hard to complain with the win, though. Different feeling from last December. Cheers to you and Eddie. Can't wait to listen this week.
Yeah, Garrett, that's a good question.
I'm starting to get questions now, KB.
Yeah.
Where they're calling me Andy on purpose, so look what you've started.
I know, that's all on me, man. I'm such an idiot. Apologies for that. Selfishly, I'd like to see the defense dictate a little bit more. The number one wideout stat is, that's something that's, that's starting to become a trend. But again, the run defense has been really solid. I think your playmaking has been pretty good. And as much as Garrett says, it's not great that Tennessee penetrated into your territory as much as you did. Part of defense in the NFL is, can you bow up when it's time to? And the Colts did that quite often on Sunday. And ultimately, points scored is points scored. So a glass half full, glass half empty, those are two, obviously very different ends of the spectrum there. I think there's reason to have some optimism about this Colts defense. But at the same time, you look at a challenge like Sunday, and that's one of the bigger ones. And Eddie, it's one of those things where, man, you start looking at the quarterbacks you're going to face. I mean, what? Dorian Thompson maybe next week, and, I guess Derek Carr, but then, who knows if Bryce Young's even going to be the quarterback? Who knows if Mac Jones is even going to be the quarterback? Baker Mayfield and Tannehill. It's not like you're playing this gauntlet of quarterbacks this season.
I think I think they're not going with DTR if Watson is out this week. I think they're going with P.J. Walker.
Are they going P.J. Walker?
Mm-hmm.
Well, not that that's all of a sudden going to make Gus Bradley lose any more sleep.
No, not at all. With Anthony Richardson's injury, what significant changes do you think the Colts could make to drill it into his head to protect himself? Question is from Vaughn. I get it. It is who he is as a player, but as a Colts fan, we have suffered so much from bad luck around here. Are we cursed?
Well, Vaughn, I
hope that's not a pun, because
the luck comment.
Yeah.
I would say let's start here, because I got into the design run thing. We can get back to it here in just a second, Eddie. But I think Richardson did a nice job the last couple of weeks of making a few more business decisions. And I think business decisions have a very negative connotation. Like, you're basically saying when you make a business decision that you're being soft. I don't care. Be soft. I don't need to see you do Josh Allen. I don't need to see you extend a 2nd and 7 scramble that you've already gotten a first down. I don't need to see you cut it back to the middle of the field. I don't need that.
Mm-hmm.
You are tough. You made it to the NFL. Congratulations. If it matters to you, you've checked the box in the Kevin Bowen toughness meter. I don't need to see any more. So I would start there. When you have opportunities where you're scrambling or you're in the open field, continue to make the business decisions. Okay? That's my first thought.
Check.
Then let's go back to the design runs, Eddie. What did I say earlier? Take the number 8, bring it down to 4 design runs in a game?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's do that math. A lot of math that we're doing here on Kevin's Corner. Okay, how many games are in a season?
17.
Okay, 17 times 4 is what? 8, carry the 2.
68.
68, okay.
8, carry the 2.
I'm trying to picture myself helping Rosie with her multiplication here coming up in probably, I don't know, whatever, half a dozen years. Actually, probably earlier than that. Okay, so let's say he runs out of bounds on 10 of those 68 hits.
Okay.
So now we're down to
58.
58.
How many slides?
Well, let's just group all that together. Let's say he takes 10 less hits.
Okay.
So instead of 68, he now takes
58.
58. If there's 1 or 2 injuries in those 10 hits, isn't that a win? Like, if you just avoided one of the Harold Landrys, which I know the Harold Landrys is not necessarily the greatest example because he couldn't have gotten out of bounds there. But could Steichen have not called the design run early in the second quarter. I don't want to sound like I'm roasting Shane Steichen for this. I think you need to run him like you did to get a feel for who he is as an NFL player. Because, again, this goes back to the debate of what you had during the draft. You didn't really know what you had with him. So you had to kind of throw everything out there and see what sticks. But can you get, I don't know, if you have 10 less hits a year, now that I'm looking at the math, I feel like I didn't even do that right.
4.
Okay, so 4 times 17, 68, right?
Yeah.
So we're taking out 68 runs, okay? Let's say he gets hit on 60 of those 68, right? Because we're saying he goes out of bounds or he slides on the other 8.
Yeah.
So we're taking out 60 hits. That's a much bigger number. So if you're taking out 60 hits, what if you got a couple of injuries?
How'd you get 60?
8 design runs becomes 4 a game. 4 times 17 is 68.
Okay.
There's our 68 hit.
I got it.
That, if you do the math on that, that obviously is something that, I don't know, helps them out. I don't know, man. Now this math is stressing me out. Don't do math on the podcast. I used to like math too.
Yeah, so you're looking at 68 just by lowering the number from 8 per game to 4 per game, and then 78, 80 if he slides or goes out of bounds on 10 to 12.
Should we move on?
We can if you'd like.
I apologize for that. God, that was painful.
3 questions left.
Oh, thankfully.
Cody, I was going to ask about just the stark difference between Frank Reich and Shane Steichen. I know it's early, but I don't think it can be understated how crazy it is, the difference of this team, especially considering how in shambles they were last season, from preparation to mental toughness and the fact that Carolina has looked dreadful.
Yeah, I think that is certainly, boy, Frank Reich right now, man. Is he going to make it to Halloween?
Boy, I don't know.
Cody, I do think part of this is just a new coach and a new message and not stale and old. And I think at times last year I mentioned, Frank's message, when the message is super consistent, you could also say it's super stale. And when the losing starts to happen as well, then it gets really stale. I think Shane brings more of the energy that younger players like.
Yes.
That I don't want to sound like I'm an ageist with that comment. I just think that is a little bit more of what players gravitate towards. Now, again, I think any new coach, Eddie, would provide a different environment. And guys would just walk back into the building after 4 months and they'd be like, hallelujah, folks. Thank you, Raheem Morris. You are exactly what we needed.
Yeah.
So I don't.
I just felt like they got tired of the kumbaya, the mountain,
Right. So I don't want this to be like Frank Reich is literally the worst coach in the history of professional sports, and Shane Steichen is Vince Lombardi. But I do think this style of coaching is what players gravitate towards a little bit more. Again, I think, when we made the Sirianni-Reich comparison so often with Steichen, I tried to tell our listeners, he's more Sirianni than Reich, which is what you want, in my opinion. I'm not saying end-all, be-all works. There's a lot that goes into coaching, and you've got to have a brilliant mind. He certainly has that. But there is obviously a difference to this. And again, I would hope there would be. I mean, you just had one of the most embarrassing seasons in your franchise's history. I would hope the players would just have self-motivation this year at a different level than last year.
Yeah, when I was at that game Sunday, I watched Shane Steichen just rip into the official over something that they missed, that they didn't call. It was on that final drive of the game, and I was sitting there. I'm like, did I ever see Frank Reich do that? Did Frank ever challenge an official like that?
Yeah.
Demonstratively?
Right.
I was like, I can't think of that.
Yeah. And again, you can have mild-mannered head coaches that have success. I mean, let's not act like Frank didn't have any success here. He certainly had some success. But I think if you were to poll players and say, what would you rather have? They'd rather have more of the undresser.
Yeah, just because, if you're slacking, he will, like you just said, he will undress you.
Right. And again, look at the accountability, whether it's a Deion Jackson, whether it's a Darryl Baker, things like that we've already seen.
2 questions left. Jordan and Gatto. Hey, KB, just wondering how you think the Colts will divide out carries between Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor, and can you take Zach Moss out of the lead back role that he has now with the momentum he has right now?
Yeah, again, we kind of touched on this earlier, Eddie. 10 snaps and 7 touches for Taylor. I don't think that number becomes 50-50 right away, but I do think over the course of a game, Eddie, you can kind of get into that hot hand feel. I think you could map out going into Sunday, okay, how about 18 for Moss, 12 for Taylor, or 20 for Moss, 10 for Taylor. But if one guy's kind of feeling it, I'm fine with that number shifting a little bit here. There's been some times as a Notre Dame fan this year, I'm like, wait, what a minute? That's who the running back is in at this point of the game? So I do think those are some things that you can do and should do. So it sounds like they're going to continue to ramp him up. It's not going to be a massive amount for Taylor, but I think slowly but surely that number will continue to get closer. But Moss deserves to be the lead guy. Moss deserves to be the starting back on Sunday.
100%. I would agree with you there. Does Shaq Leonard have a future with the Indianapolis Colts? This is from Jay. With the way Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed have been playing, I don't think so. He would have a liability on the big 4th down late, in my opinion, if he was out there. Love the podcast and your content.
Jay, I appreciate it. Eddie, this question will continue to hold higher relevance. It's October 11th, so the answer on October 11th doesn't necessarily mean that that's the answer on December 11th or January 11th or February 11th. But if you all of a sudden had to make a decision today, you'd have to debate. You'd have to convince me why Shaquille Leonard should still be here. You got to get the return on that contract. And if not, you better take a big-time restructure with that. And again, if you're going to go play a game tomorrow and you needed 2 linebackers, I'd pick Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed.
Yeah.
You can't ignore you've drafted well at this spot, too. So, you don't think Zaire Franklin needs a bump in pay? He was asked about that today. He didn't want to go anywhere close to that one. But he certainly deserves that. And Leonard's contract is very friendly in that you can get out of it right now. It's still, he's under contract through 2026, but the dead cap hit would not be too much. I think it's $8 million, if I'm not mistaken. I think you'd save about 12 last I checked. I could have that number wrong, but I believe that is where it's at. So, yeah, Eddie, again, the good news is this is still week 6, and Gus Bradley said, we'll wait till November to really kind of see the full Leonard. So
still, you mean already? Like it's gone by quick.
Well, yeah, that is something that, again, you don't have to make this decision now, but based off what we've seen so far, this is a Franklin Speed thing. And when you talk about allocating resources and where you are investing money and where you put this and where you put that, like you got to have return on investment. And it'd be one thing, Eddie, if I could recall, and obviously he missed last week, but if you go off the first 4 games, I can't even recall times where I remember Leonard making a play.
Just 1 tackle for loss, right?
Yeah, Jacksonville, right? Is that first game of the season. So, whereas Franklin and Speed, it just seems like there's so many of them. Obviously, Franklin more than Speed. How about Zaire Franklin, Eddie? Since 2000, he is one of 2 linebackers ever, and by ever I mean 23 years, since 2000, to have at least 12 tackles in each of the first 5 games.
Himself
and Zach Thomas.
Darn.
Wild. And again, like, we're talking, it's not like the games have changed over time in the sense of, like, anytime you get now season statistics, you've got the inflated one by a game now, since we've added a game to the NFL schedule. But we're just going off first 5 games of the season. Him and Zach Thomas, only linebackers in the last 23 years to have at least 12 tackles.
KB, it's Wednesday.
Of the first 5 games.
It's Wednesday.
Yes. Does that mean prediction time?
Yep. Who you got?
4-point spread, right? Am I going first?
Yeah, you're going first.
almost nailed last week, 19-17. That was somewhat close. Let's go.
I had 2013.
Oh, you were very close as well. Let's go Jacksonville 26, Colts 17.
26?
26. Missed extra point after hitting a couple field goals in a windy day in Jacksonville.
I will do Jags 24, Colts 20.
Close one.
And the Colts cover.
Minshew Mania. Leading a late charge there for that one. He is Eddie Garrison. I'm Kevin Bowen. Everybody have a great week. Content up on 1075thefan.com. Thank you for tuning in to Kevin's Corner. Go Irish, beat USC, please.